Hey folks, welcome back. Today I am jumping in with a review of the beautiful Animal Guide rune cards, and the two creators actually reached out to me and asked me if I would like to review a copy, give it a go, see how it works. So I said yes. It came at the end of 2024. In honesty, I would have loved to have worked with it for like 6 months before, because I've ended up diving into quite an interesting study of the runes, using a lot of the materials that I have and some online sources to, I guess, make a more robust runic understanding, keywords, experience for myself. So it's been a part of a far larger process. So I'm very intimately familiar with the cards and the artwork. I will say right off the bat, whilst I have read a decent amount of the book and acquainted myself with the contents of it, that I haven't read every page cover to cover. It just didn't end up being accessible in the sort of time frame in which I wanted to produce something, and thank the creators for giving me the opportunity to experience this deck, because I hadn't even heard of it until they reached out to me. And for those who aren't familiar with my page or myself or my practice and what I do a lot of animal work. I coined it animal gnosis, and that was really to attempt to try and give a broad meaning to something that has a lot of facets in it. So I study a lot of animal behaviour, a lot of the science behind the animal studies, from sort of academic papers to just more wildlife observations by local enthusiasts. I read a lot of animal folklore. I work with animal magic, and I engage with the wildlife and animals within my area, and I've also done some animal rescue over the years as well. So it's something I'm passionate about, and animal gnosis is really sort of a play on the knowledge that comes from animals and the knowledge we associate to animals through the human lens, and all of the variations, as I say, from folklore to behaviour. So it's kind of a broad term that I used for the offerings that I do now on Patreon and stuff as well. And then I'm also a rune reader, rune worker, although even 4 years in, which I think is about the right amount of time, I still feel very much I guess a little bit more than a beginner. Like, a beginner's probably not fair, but I think intermediate is too far. Somewhere in between those two. They, for me, prove to be a much vaster language per rune. Yeah, it's been an interesting experience. But anyway, I thought I would just give you a little insight. And one of the questions that I wanted to ask myself, based on the way that this deck presents, is, do animal guides work within the rune system? Because whilst there are some rune discussions that associate animals to them, and you can go on various blogs and things and people will have associated animals to every single one, the ones that I find that come up commonly are fewer and further between. So things like 𝗕𝗿𝗄 with wealth and cattle. So I wanted to see, does the way that I work with animals make sense within a runic system? Spoiler, they do work for me, but whether that works for everyone, it depends. The deck's not in order, but we will go through the entire deck. So just a heads up, even though this is a review, I always do like a walkthrough style. And just to give you a quick look at the box, it is Blue Angel, I believe. Yeah, Blue Angel Publishing. So it is actually a mass market deck. And of course, because it's the rune system, there is a far smaller amount of cards. It is one of the few times I will accept this. There are 25 because they do include an extra. I feel like it's a bit different to the blank rune. And also, if you're curious, I've never used the blank rune. It's not something that I include. However, the 25th card, which is actually pictured here, I do include because the concept of it makes sense to me within this system. And they're discussing the elder 𝗕𝗿𝗙 runes, just to be clear, because of course we've got the younger 𝗕𝗿𝗙, we've also got the Anglo-Saxon variations, which then can extend further beyond that. You've got witches' runes, which are completely different, so it's worthwhile knowing what runes you're going into before. As you can see, the guidebook is actually very significant, however, so let's get this out of your way. But yes, it does have thumb holes, and aside from the plastic outside, that's it as well, which is nice. So we're going to jump into the guidebook and I'm going to give you a little look. I will discuss sort of how I've used them and my experience as we get into the cards. As I say, I didn't end up reading the book cover to cover, but I did acquaint myself intimately with enough of the book, because it is a chunky book. It takes up more of the box than the deck, which is lovely. It's very beautifully laid out, it's got full colour artwork, but it's got a lot of content as well, which I feel for the most part is definitely still quality, so it's not just quantity. So here in the introduction we've got what are the runes, about the illustrations, elements of the guidebook, basics of rune casting, cartomancy and meditations. This I read all of. I've read a selection of the meanings of rune archetypes. And then in the appendix, we've got a table of magical applications and advanced rune techniques, and then a bit about the authors. I do feel like it's important to share the background of the authors quickly, because some of the inclusions that perhaps didn't necessarily appeal to me will definitely appeal to other people and make sense for the authors. So we've got a lovely picture of the two of them here, and they are currently creating a tarot deck as well, which is very fun to see. I freaking love their artwork. So it says here that they are classically trained in visual arts with academic backgrounds in philosophy and cultural studies. So that's really the bit that I wanted to highlight. It also describes them as eclectic witches that are constantly broadening their knowledge of esotericism, focusing primarily on divination practices, creation of spells and rituals, green witchery and rune magic. And then it goes into a bit about their other hobbies and also their shared passion for wildlife exploration. So it gives you an understanding why some of the subsections and context in this book are in there. Also, they're actually called wild fox deers on Instagram, and the reason I note this, as when we come to this rune card, you'll see that instead of being one animal, this is actually an amalgamation of deer and fox. So it has a very thorough introduction, meditations, spreads, discussion of cartomancy versus rune casting, and all of that kind of good stuff. A very fair exploration for people, especially if they're entirely new to it. There is a lot that I loved about the book. One of the things I will mention, I didn't necessarily love at least one of the book's references, which was Edda Thorson. It's one of those things when you get into rune work and you start looking into some of the very well-known creators that have a plethora of books out and stuff like that. They do get mentioned an awful lot. This is definitely not the only place, and I even had a book of his originally when I first started out. Go and read him up, make decisions for yourself. He is very prolifically known when you're exploring runes, and he's not someone that I would support. There are a significant selection of rune books and creators over the years that are massively problematic. I never love to see his name pop up in particular. As someone who has also mentioned that person in some of my older works as well, I'm not suggesting that I am clear of that or that I had that information either. So it's just something that I recognised as I was flicking through the book. It's literally just a mention. I think I more so wanted to highlight how some of these works over the years can be such a significant part of like people's recommendations or the knowledge that they rely on, and we don't always know about the person who created them very much, and so it's something worthwhile thinking about. Then we go into the meaning of the rune archetypes, and I just wanted to acquaint you with exactly what this looks like. The cards have 3 keywords, which is lovely. And the reason I like that is because as I've gone through the study myself, one of the things that I've been doing is trying to curate my own rune keywords and associations, not completely separate from everyone else's, but mainly based on the poems, which is one of the first places I started, and then on the other sort of information and other people's work that I'm engaging with, and work out what makes sense to me, what hopefully I'm going to remember, how I'm going to remember it, that kind of thing. So that's what I mean. This was part of a very big study. I'll just list some creators and places to check out that I would personally recommend in the write-up below, so check that out. Back to this, one of the things I really appreciated about this, and it is mentioned in the intro, and then I believe, here we go, we've got the Anglo-Saxon version of the rune poems included in the book, which I love. You can look up the rune poems online, and they are often included in rune books. There are variations, so it is good to know what one in particular that you're reading. So I really respect that they included that. I really find that that is one of my favourite inclusions in the book. The 3 keywords, it's lovely that they briefly discuss what we're actually seeing in the card, and then they've got this massive lore section. The lore section is the part of this book that I personally like the most. It talks about concepts of the card and its creation and its meaning. One of the things that it does do is it does pull in other sort of philosophical ideas and other cultural mythology and references. That's not necessarily my favourite bit, but the reason that I think that it might be useful for other people is if you work within another pantheon or you're familiar with some of the other references, it may actually help you then make those connections. So whilst it wasn't necessarily my favourite thing to sort of explore all the pantheon stuff, it makes sense, especially based on the creators' sort of backgrounds and knowledge. But I really do like the lore, and what the lore also includes is a breakdown of why they chose the animal. Sometimes it's longer than others, but I think if you're going to create a deck where the animals are pretty much visually as a significant part as the rune meanings themselves, firstly, we need to see why they were chosen, and secondly, how that traverses into the meaning, like how it's being embodied, how it makes sense to the creators. And out of all of the ones I've checked, it does that very, very clearly throughout. There is a lot of information per card. It then goes into message, which I didn't mind either, and I found myself reading. It then goes into person, place, time, relationships, career, health, magical uses, correspondences. I think that's it. Yes, and then the next card. Lots of information. If you're curious, after it gets the message, whilst I can pull some connections out of the rest of the information, I personally like the lore and the message the most. The way that I was doing my studies then veered away from this after that. I do think that it's great that you've got so much variety, because then you can just pick what makes sense and leave the rest. People will know that I am very particular about health, how it's spoken about in divination stuff, how it's read with, how it's engaged with. I think that it's one of the areas that can leave people very vulnerable and can be a problematic area. That's not suggesting the creators are. It's not a part of my practice. So in that sense, I'm really appreciative that the lore got so much space and the animals were explained, because if they weren't, I think whilst I could have made connections between them, firstly, that's a lot more legwork for the person using the deck, and secondly, it would just be a huge missing gap. So they have thoroughly thought of everything, and I think in terms of what's included in the guidebook, they actually are quite broad in that I think it can appeal to different styles of practice, because whilst I don't read in some of the ways that are included, people definitely do very regularly, very comfortably, and so that's in there for you. And that is most of the book. Like I said, there's the gorgeous large pictures included at points as well. They're stunning. This is actually the only human in the deck. And then I just want to give a shout out to the end section as well, which is the appendix. Another great little addition. We've got table of magical applications. I really appreciate this. It's a great place to quickly come and reference something. Then we've got some advanced runic techniques, which again, quite interesting. You can see here that we've got some bind runes. We've got exercises, association game. I haven't tried that yet. And even a recipe before we go into the author, and then the final bits that are generally included in a mass market deck. So shouting out other decks. There is a hell of a lot packed into this book, and I think that makes it a standout in particular. The only thing I would love to have seen included is a bibliography, which I appreciate is a guidebook, not a standalone, but I would have absolutely loved that. If there was like just a few suggestions, that would have been an awesome addition. But overall, there's a lot to keep you busy. I mean, I don't think that much more could be asked for from this book. It was a really interesting concept to explore in just terms of the animals with the runes. I think that will be something that I only include with this deck. It's not something that's going to traverse into my usual rune work, but it's a very fun addition for me. One of the things that I'm enjoying using it for outside of the study is actually pulling a rune and an animal and working with both in the ways that I naturally would, and having them out in my altar space for like a longer period of time as a sort of overall archetype and just energetic presence that might be significant for me to pay attention to at the time. So let's get into the cards. This is the back. I don't know if the backs are discussed in the book. I remember trying to find it. I could have well missed it, but we've got this beautiful stave in the middle, and then the runes are actually repeated, I think about 3 times around the outside. It is a really nice card stock. It's matte finish, but it doesn't stick to each other. It's not rose petal matte. Over time, you find they then start to sort of loosen up, but really beautiful, highlights the artwork just so well. And they're what I would refer as quite a traditional oracle size, so larger than a tarot card. Considering I've got teeny tiny hands, if I shuffle them upright, I've had no problems with them whatsoever. So before I sort of, I guess, recap the study that I've been doing, just as we flick through the cards and look at them, you can enjoy and make your own assumptions about them, but I really wanted to sort of just share the overall practice that I've been doing with them. I will just show you that all of them are numbered. The guidebook is very easy to navigate. The contents is very reliable. And then we've got our 3 keywords repeated underneath. For the most part, at least 2 of the keywords have made sense, really resonated with me. There has been several occasions where perhaps a keyword that I would definitely associate with the rune overall isn't necessarily on the card. But part of the study for me has been, as I say, challenging my own, building upon my own, working out what makes sense to me and what doesn't. And this has just been one of 2 rune decks. So I've also been using the green glyph runes because it's very, very different to this. There is a very small amount of information, but it's very concise and to the point. So it's really easy to reference. They're the 2 decks that I've been using. I've also had my runes out. I have been utilising the links and the people that I have included below over the years anyway. And then if you're on my Patreon, where I did a very in-depth practice video about how I was studying this, and I actually showed people all of my note-taking and stuff, you'll see that I had sort of gathered everything that I'd written about the runes in the last 4 years, common themes, the bits that make the most sense to me, and then kind of just finessed it and started comparing it against these and the information in the lore. So that's kind of the overall approach that I took with this, but I was impressed with the keyword choices. I will also add, and now we'll just start going through the deck, that the animals seem to complement the keyword choices in particular very, very well. I might not have necessarily gone straight to the animals that they chose per rune. As I say, some of them make a lot of sense to me because they're sort of connected to those animals anyway. And then I assume that some of them are more sort of personal connections. They make sense, like I say, the writing really reinforces that, but it was interesting to see what was included where, and to even think a little bit about, would I have put this animal there? What other animals make sense to me in these particular sort of cards with the runes, with the meanings. One of the things that I love about the rest of the artwork as well is that it's not just the animal that connects in with the meaning and the message. The colour is used very purposefully. It's to create a sort of atmosphere, a feeling, an energy, some associations. The weather, time of day, they all feel very, very meaningful, very purposefully done. So you can see the lightning in here, and you can also, on the owl's head, see that the rune is actually inscribed. Sometimes the rune is on the animal, sometimes the rune is on something in and around. Now on this one, I can't actually find the rune. I'll see if I can get you the rune very quickly. Here we are. So if you're curious, this is the rune. I can't find it in this piece of artwork. And I'm wondering if it's just me being dense and missing it, because it is actually something that's included in the rest. However, whilst we're looking at this, I will read you a couple of bits out of the guidebook because I thought it might give you a bit more of a flavour. So underneath where we've got the 3 keywords, we've got a description of what we're seeing. So just in case you don't know whether this might be like a sunrise or sunset, for example, it says, as soon as the dawn touches its wings, it is filled with life. In the pink light, it becomes younger, straightens its body, curled up by the night chill, and flies hopefully to meet the day, forgetting how short a butterfly's life is. So I feel like they're really poignant descriptions, and it's, you know, it gets to the point quickly. And then if you're curious, the Anglo-Saxon rune poem inclusion, which it says the meaning is day. Day, the glorious light of the Creator, is sent by the Lord. It is beloved of men, a source of hope and happiness to rich and poor, and of service to all. So that's just 2 of the inclusions, and actually they're highlighted by a different colour font as well. Again, making it really, really easy to flick through the book and find the bits that you're trying to reference for each. So yeah, I just thought I would add that bit in, but also say, I can't find this. And I really love kind of spot where it is, but if you can see it, just let me know. I do like the concept that it could actually be the entire butterfly making this shape, because it's very much mirrored in that imagery. So I guess you could say it's included in that way. We will carry on going through the cards. The drawings are just absolutely stunning. They're really great to sort of get lost in for a while. That's something that I've been doing, but I really like the idea of sort of meditating on an art piece with either all of the information that I already know and sort of going into it and seeing how it then speaks to that, or on the other hand, just pulling a card, seeing what the artwork says to me just straight off the bat intuitively, maybe then holding it in my mind's eye because I am very visual and I can do that, seeing how I would see the artwork come to life. Maybe the bat would stay here, maybe they would fly off. I definitely see this as like a doorway into this experience, which suggests to me that there is a way to step in and out of it, meaning that it's not sort of permanent and it's not that stasis feeling for me. So kind of playing with that and then coming to the book, the other resources that I reference, and seeing how it all comes together, whether that adds something to it. I really like to consider just the intuitive hits, because I think that when working with the runes, there is a lot of it that demands that very personal relationship, in my experience at least. And again, I think there was that nice part about having the keywords there, but not necessarily automatically going to them. I do find that for myself, it's really easy to look at the artwork without first going here. I'm sure that's a very personal experience. And if you're curious, as we play Hunt the Rune, you can see in the moon, in the side of the horse here. I love the way that they're framed as well, and that there's a lot of play in and out of said framing. And I think the fact of it is that artwork is so incredibly important to me that it was going to be an equal part in this, because for me, this isn't a system that is usually a card system, you know, and I wasn't particularly looking to get decks to work with the runes because I didn't want to distance myself too much from the experience of runes, and trying to really create like associations with the shapes myself, because that's one of the things that I know helps me learn. Having this as a study aid and having it speak to that layer of animal, which is so familiar to me and so accessible, has really created another connection in. And so it's actually been really beneficial and quite surprising in that way. Here's the human. So you can see that the reason that we have the human in this one is because it's talking about humanity. So I really love that inclusion. I can't remember if this was an indie deck ever, but I know that there was artwork for it originally, and I believe that some of the cards were like mildly reworked before they went into this. So as I say, if there was an indie deck first, I'm not familiar with it, and this is the mass market version. Freaking love this one, and it's subtle, but you can still see that the rune is on the fox's chest. Here the rune's on the individual's earring. Again, this really helps me, those associations, magic, cunning and mystery. Obviously I've got my own. Being able to sort of see this word in my head and then think of the fox and the mushrooms, which I definitely associate to these three keywords, just in themselves before thinking about the rune, really just so helpful. And the colour palette in this is really, really rich, but not in a way where it's oversaturated. And here on 𝗕𝗿𝗲, you can actually see that it's on their neck. It's really subtle there, which is why I'm wondering if I've missed the butterfly one. And for me, I remember with this one, the connections to Odin and some of the discussion in the lore were particularly poignant. They made a lot of sense to me. I think that given more time, this is going to perhaps get me to a next level with my rune studies and practice that I really felt that I had like a blocking point for. I don't want to obviously rely on them, but you know when something just opens a doorway? So that's I've found very helpful. So the rune is here, but you can see it very obviously here in the polar bear's eye. So as I say, sort of hunting for them, it's a fun game. I don't think any of the keywords are repeated either, which of course, whilst they could be in other cards, conceptually I do like it when there is that distance between them so that they're quite defined per rune. Here we have the 25th card, so I briefly mentioned this in passing at the beginning. Don't love the keyword karma because it's just not one that I use. But in terms of destiny and the unknown and the weird itself concept around that, it makes a lot of sense to me. And the fact that they picked the snake for this feels very, very fitting, because snake comes up with those themes, the transformative stuff, a lot of the unconscious, unknown, more, I guess, shadow aspects that humans associate them with in particular. So I really loved them for this card, and that's why I'd kept it in. As soon as I decided to leave it in, I pulled it probably several times. It didn't add anything to my rune studies, but it was very poignant in its time and place, if that makes sense. So here we've got 𝗕𝗿𝗄, and for this one, I expected to see cattle on it because of the rune poem, because of the associations that, you know, as far back as we can go And I love that they've included things like the wheat in the horns, and just how it all brings together the idea of wealth and abundance, farming, the harvesting of things. And as I say, the scene in the background, the environment that the animals are placed in, it always makes a lot of sense to just how it's all tying everything together. I think this one was one of the few where I would have liked to have seen another keyword perhaps changed out for one of these three. But again, being able to look at them and say, okay, well, they make sense to me, but perhaps this association feels more dominant than where these three have gone. These three are very complementary of each other, but it felt like almost like a bit that I associate with it wasn't necessarily there in the keyword. When you go into the guidebook, some of those times that context is then found within the guidebook. But like I say, in terms of going into like a deeper study with it and having it out, I would like pull a card from this, I'd get the rune out, I'd get my phone on my computer out, get all the notes that I've like condensed down into my, I guess, my favoured terms and discussions. And then I would get the rune poems, both of the guidebooks from this deck and the other one, and sit and just plough through them, and even sometimes listen to like 𝗕𝗿𝗲 in the background or someone else, and kind of challenge what it was about it that perhaps didn't fit for me, or really in some senses really did fit for me, and why it made sense. And I find that when I do that and I go into that kind of back and forth, that's a part of what cements it as a language, as a memory, as something that I can call upon naturally without having to rely upon things like guidebooks. So I'm very thankful for the deck for that. This is absolutely my favourite rune. I don't know if you're meant to have a favourite, but I do. I have this as a form of a protection talisman that I wear. It's a beautiful piece, and I really obviously love that they kept with the stag on this one. And here you can see the rune is actually inscribed in the gap in the sunlight. It really stands out to me. It feels like quite a powerful one, and definitely keywords that I find familiar. And I love how the warmth and the protection is really sort of centered in, even in and around the antlers, whereas what's going on outside is perhaps a more cold, harsher environment. So it even speaks to the idea of like when and why we might call upon this particular rune, just as an example. Because one of the other things that I do is I work with the runes in my craft. So it's not just about divining with them, reading with them. I actually use them for other purposes. I love this little hedgehog. And then the apples. And then we've got like the acorns with the oak leaves here. Very, very autumnal, which fits with the harvest. So you can see it just all comes in together beautifully. And how they have captured the smoke coming out of their nose as they breathe, just I did have a real moment with this. I remember it turned up when I was bedbound, and I was just sitting in bed going through really slowly, looking at the colours, looking at all the finer details, because this is an art style that has a lot of finer details, and it's one of my favourite styles for that very reason. And because the colours are so rich, look how many browns and greens are in this one piece. It's got that kind of tonal theming to it as well. If you're someone who notices colour, if you work with colour, if you do those associations, which I've actually sort of recently spoken to in another video, you'll see that you can bring that in with this deck as well, which I have playfully done when I am focusing less on the rune study itself and more just working with the deck with whatever it's offering to me, you know, like on face value, as it were. And for me, not only then the animal makes sense, but when I think of sensitivity, emotions and flow, the element that comes to mind, especially because of my tarot associations, is water, and it is these very like aquatic blues and turquoise. I love the idea of the lilies there, and then the cool to think about what's underneath and how they bloom, what they grow from. So there is a lot more than meets the eye should the person want it? And on the other hand, I think that, like I said, on face value, these would offer a lot, because I'm sure that some people don't necessarily want to do all of the rune study, and perhaps that's not why they want them. And I'm not about to tell you how you should practice. So in that sense, this is quite a robust deck, because really you don't need to know even about the animals, because there's enough in the book for it to contextually make sense from what I've read. And so here we come back to this one, which I was saying about the fox and the deer. And what we realise is for this rune that it is bringing in the concept of unity. And so I love that they added this personal element of themselves into the deck, but it is knowing that helps it sort of make sense for me. Just thought I would share that because of the thorn association. I love that we've actually got all these thorns coming off. And we see other associations, like I think I mentioned, perfect timing, the birch trees in 𝗕𝗿𝗸𝗸 is actually a very significant inclusion for me. It's one that I already had in my selection. It makes a lot of sense. And I love this. I love the little cub. It's actually a really wonderfully soft card without coming away from the wild facet of the animal. I think that animals are perhaps a better representation of things like that sometimes, and those dualities, than humans, so that's always fun. I believe this is our last card. Oh, and here is another example. So here 𝗕𝗿𝗸𝗸 is there, and then on here the rune is on their chest. And look at it, it's like they're dripping gold. Honestly, they're really, really beautiful. So I have to say, this has been a pleasant surprise. I had a good feeling about it, which is why I said yes. Whilst I can't speak for anyone else's experience, and it's important to remember that when you watch someone's review, I do like to clearly and honestly reflect mine. And I know that there's a lot of feelings about when people receive reviews over paying their own money for something. I can safely say, whether you choose to believe me or not is different, that I would have happily paid for this mass market deck and would feel like I definitely had a worthwhile, enjoyable resource that I'm looking forward to using. You will definitely see more of it, and I hope to eventually have read all of the book just to have done it once. It's been an absolute delight to spend time with, but as I say, it's also really helped reinvigorate a study which, yes, over the last 4 years, I do confess, because of my health and all of the issues I have with that, it's been up and down. It ebbs and flows. Some months they get a lot of my time, other months they don't necessarily get used. You know, between working and then just trying to recuperate from the body's experience from that. So it's been really helpful in that sense. And whilst I may have had some critiques about the book, I have never not had critiques about a book. When we divine, when we throw cards, runes, whatever it is so very personalised, and mine integrates a lot of things that other people might not integrate. And so because of that and the way that we tailor it, I definitely feel like every time I go through a book or a deck, there's always things that I end up thinking, what would I have put instead? But that for me is a part of the learning process, and I like that I've been invited to do that, and that it's got me back into a far more developed rune study, and one that's been a lot more committed over the recent months. And I do think in its weird and wonderful way, it's going to help me with my runes. But as I say, I don't imagine myself not using it. I think that once the study is finished, I will use it as an altar rune, sort of a covering archetype for not only the rune, but like I said, the animal invitation, because that's work that I do anyway. So it makes a lot of sense to my practice. And in that way, this deck is kind of tailored to me very well. So it's been really exciting. I'm very thankful that they reached out to me. Like, it's been such a pleasant surprise. There's so much to dive into. And I'm looking forward to perhaps putting it to use, maybe getting it into a few newsletters, stuff like that. But I just wanted to do that really immersive, personalised study with it first. And so yeah, that's where I'm at with it. But it's been really fun. Definitely, as I say, would have bought it myself. So that's what I have to say on this deck right now. If you've got any questions about anything I missed, or you want to add anything, or you have this deck, you know, share away in the comments below. Other than that, I will just say thank you to the creators once more. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you all again soon. Bye.